So super excited to have you all here. Thank you much. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Alex Simmons. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Boon, which is a personalized one-to-one coaching platform for primarily for small to mid-sized businesses that is bridging the gap between mental well-being and professional growth in the workplace, which we are really seeing more and more of in today's world where work life and personal life are just more intertwined than ever. And so we thought, this being around performance review season and just thinking about how much performance management has continued to evolve in recent years, we thought it'd be a really good time to have a bigger conversation around performance management in the workplace. And what better than to consult with two of our partners, TriNet and Bennie. So Cathy and Kia, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll give some brief backgrounds and then maybe we can dig into it. But Cathy Manginelli, who's the Chief Talent Officer at TriNet, which is one of the largest PEOs in the world, working with tens of thousands of small and mid-sized businesses across the country. And TriNet itself has thousands of employees. And then Kia, who's the HR leader at Bennie, who is a small to mid-size employee benefits platform. So Boon works with Bennie and TriNet in a few different ways, as you can think about our focus being in the small to mid-size space and both TriNet and Bennie. But Cathy and Kia, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
And Cathy, maybe we'll just start with you and just maybe talking a little bit in terms of the macro landscape today, and just how has your perspective on performance management evolved in the past year or two?
Well, I could even speak to how it's evolved in the past 30 years or two.
Oh, there you go.
Since I started in HR. No, it really, I think we were seeing a revolution, I would say, in the performance management space, probably in the last 5 to 6 years. And then when COVID hit, the pandemic hit, remote hybrid work became more complex for us as far as managing performance. That just really accelerated I'll call modernization that is really needed of organizations in this space. And so, performance management is a very broad topic, right? It's inclusive of goal setting and development planning, and larger companies probably do succession and talent planning connected to that. Rewards, recognition, motivation, engagement. It's all about the colleague experience, really, the CX, if you will, the colleague experience that everyone keeps talking about. And so specifically, I think when we went remote, when the hybrid workforces kind of became a current thing, managers that were used to managing someone's performance or giving that feedback and coaching outside of their office or as they passed by the desk had to get shifted, right? And so we're seeing a lot of trends in using technology, which is why AI continues to be in every space of business, whether it's generative AI or chatbots or all of those trends out there. How do we leverage those tools to help accelerate? So I think the way in which we were having the conversations changed. I think the emphasis of the conversations have changed as well. So you talked a little bit about your story in Boon, which, as you know, I'm hugely passionate about. I absolutely love what your company does. And I think that through the pandemic, employees and colleagues had a realization, had a bit of a reflection period where they want more. They want to bring their whole selves to work. In many cases, they're forced to bring their whole selves to work. You're in my home office space. That's graded
You're
out,
in mine.
right? Right. And so performance in many regards, I think, is also the trend line is don't just talk about me as a worker, talk about me as a person. Let's look at my career goals, not for this task or this quarter, but let's talk about what I want to achieve, my values that are driving how I show up as an employee, that are connected to the company values, the mission, and et cetera. And I want more of it. I want that frequent feedback. So we have at TriNet, and of course with a lot of the companies that we work with, are really looking at, I would say the modernization is coming not so much in what we need to do in this in the space of performance management, but how we're doing it differently. It's more feedback, it's more continuous, it's more conversational, it's more about the whole person and making sure that we're focusing. We don't even call it actually at TriNet performance management, we call it performance development, because it's forward looking, not fast looking. It's let's talk about your did wells and next times and how we can make sure that you're meeting your goals, and we're focused on how to develop you to for your growth.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on the whole selves to work, which is obviously something we're seeing nearly universal today. And I know Bennie has a rather younger workforce as well, a lot of millennial Gen Z talent. Like, how are you thinking about balancing the personal growth with business objectives within your performance management system as that's continued to evolve?
I think over the last few years, just with so much going on just outside of the workplace, I've seen that we're paying a lot more, similar to what Cathy said, we're paying closer attention to how we incorporate performance management year round, not just through evaluation periods, and really encouraging employees to take an active role in discussing their performance, in ongoing discussion, ongoing feedback. So have seen that, I think what I've seen in the last couple years is that employees are more vocal, which is a good thing. I've definitely seen that more, I think, than in the last more so in the last few years. So we're getting a lot more feedback. I'm seeing more emphasis on not just, the evaluation periods, but we do regular engagement surveys where we're able to get some anonymous feedback. And so I've been able to see more of that as a trend in the last couple years, not just with Bennie, but with a lot of companies. And so we're getting more information and kind of seeing how other companies and, how we can use that information to make sure that we're evolving performance management or performance development with the times and with the needs of employees.
It's funny. I think when I think back to the early 2000s, the late 90s, there was a big push to get more formal, to get more structured, have a lot more process, checks and balances, governance around performance, make sure everything's documented. How is it documented, right? I think that's a good thing. It set the foundation, but what I'm seeing as an evolution within this revolution is getting more informal, actually. So within that, you have that sort of foundational structure, right? Kay, you were just talking about that as an organization you support. But what the employees want is more of that informal, in the moment, anytime feedback, and it's bi-directional. So before it used to be, just feedback from your manager, right? You would just sort of like have this top-down approach, but now it's a 360 approach. Like we're finding that our colleagues, and we actually have the technology where you can get that feedback anytime from any place to really understand how am I doing, not only from my boss's perspective, but from the people that I work with around me's perspective as well.
It's a great point. And I think as I'm hearing you talk, it's kind of like when we've taken out some of that informal communication with the in-person stuff that we used to have, now you're trying to build in that or informal communication into this remote hybrid work, which I agree needs to be a huge emphasis. I guess where I get a little bit hung up is like when we're building all of this informal process into our structured process, how do we think about measuring success in that performance management program when it is a little bit more informal and it's, you're thinking about it more through the lens of like, okay, well, let's have consistent one-on-ones and let's get these 360 reviews scheduled. So when it's a lot more informal, how do you think about measuring success?
I mean, Kia, do you want to jump in, or do you want me to start, or?
You can start.
So I have a couple of, and I might take the question a little bit in different direction for a moment, but so a couple things. I think that the first thing is, what's the goal? Like, let's just like kind of step back and say, why do we actually manage performance, right? Why do we actually want our folks to develop and grow and kind of understand, well, it's for understanding alignment and to make sure that they're doing the best every day that they can, right? And they're achieving their goals, the company's goals. So for me, it's just that clarity of understanding. When we're consulting with folks, I will tell you, most of the time, the issues really come around setting clear expectations, or you think the and I know a lot of the SMBs we work with struggle with this, like that somebody should just know. You should just know,
Yeah.
right? You get hired, you should just know what to do or what's expected. And even when I literally just had a situation this morning where a leader thought they were communicating something, the employee did not know that this was an expectation, and there's misalignment. So I would say the first way to measure it is just to check in. Like, are we on the same page? Do you understand what I expect? And is there alignment around that? The second piece is, I call it the 3-minute rule. So there was this great study, and forgive me, I don't have the date. I read it a while ago. Anyway, that they did on doctors around patient experience. And what they found was the difference between a patient's experience with a doctor who thought the doctor was phenomenal versus a doctor who they would never want to go to again was 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And so when you start to look at that, you really go, 3 minutes. Well, what's in that 3 minutes? Well, the doctor spent 3 more minutes with that patient on average, communicating, connecting, and showing empathy and understanding. And honestly, that's the key to management, right? So I look at that, and I do that in my own practice with my team, is how am I connecting with you in different ways, throughout the week? And am I giving you that, I'll call it 3 minutes, so that we make sure that we're always on that same page and we're always aligned as to what you need to be achieving, how I feel about how you're achieving it, and are you meeting your goals? So there's some ideas for you. Kia, I would love to hear your perspective on this too, but that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, it's weird. It's similar. Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things that we try to make sure that we do is embed our values. And I know we're talking about the ongoing continuous feedback, but one of the things that we add to our performance evaluations is, how does your manager reflect our values? How do you reflect our values?
We
And
have
so
that
that makes sure
So
that
important.
throughout the year, you're actually paying attention to those values, that you come into the company, you understand what those values are, which I love our values. So
Just the what,
I
it's the
think
how,
that's
right?
just,
Yeah.
yes. So making sure
Yeah.
that periodically throughout the year, as we are engaging and continuing to change the landscape of how we work, working with technology, working with, a growing company, working with clients, how are we exhibiting those values and kind of trying to do our best to keep that at the forefront.
Yeah, and I think I'd be curious to get your guys' perspective on this. One of the biggest challenges that we are hearing continually from HR leaders, particularly, we're small businesses, think HR teams of 1 to 3 people.
Right.
They're spread super thin. They don't have a robust L&D infrastructure internally. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback we continually hear is we have these young managers. We're rapidly scaling as an organization. We have these younger managers who are not ready to lead from, and it's primarily through that lens of what you're talking about, Cathy, where it's that connection, communication, and empathy. And it's like, how do you lead and how do you build in values into how you're going to be a manager today, like you're talking about, Kia? And so I guess, what are some of the biggest advice that you have for small businesses that are starting to embed this, where they don't necessarily have the resources that a TriNet may have internally? Like, what are some good ways to get this stuff off the ground? I think embedding values is an awesome way that we've started doing at Boon from day one. But curious, like, what are some of the biggest challenges you see with small businesses? And then what are some of the easier kind of low-hanging fruit ways to embed what you're talking about into what they're doing? So Kia, maybe start with you there.
So I think some of the challenges that I've seen, I've typically only worked with small and medium-sized companies. So the challenge has been finding methods that are effective, but also take into account the resources of the company and also the capacity of employees that are probably, you're talking about a small company with large goals. Everyone, during periods, throughout the year can be kind of stretched thin, but you still have to, you know, do your performance and have these, ongoing conversations. And so it's kind of a balancing act, from a practical standpoint, yearly looking at our resources versus our needs and, what we think will be most effective, for example, in looking at the kinds of tools we use for performance. And also we're very fortunate to have a great L&D director. And so, even though we're a medium-sized company, we've seen that that's, an incredible priority and a value. So you just kind of have to look at the needs of the company and your resources and balance whatever that means today, but just continuing to have those conversations.
Yeah. Cathy, how about
We're
you?
seeing, we're seeing it with our clients, right? I mean, if they have nothing, it's hard, to build something. If they have something, but they don't have a lot of resources or structure or technology or tools to support that, right? Sometimes some of our businesses, because of the limited workforce that's available to them, they're even reticent to give coaching and feedback. I don't know because I don't want them to leave, so there's all that dynamic that plays into it. But listen, my advice, if and we have for our clients, we have a wonderful organizational health assessment and diagnostic that we do, and we can help build that with you and take some of that heavy lift if you don't have the infrastructure within your organization, and we'll consult with you and we'll do that work that Key is talking about, where it's like, let's talk about your mission, vision, how is it connected? But simply put, I would say this, I like being fancy on a Friday. Who doesn't, right? But there's no place for fancy in performance development. Keep it simple, especially for small businesses. Don't try to boil the ocean. You will die under the weight of it. There's so much to take on when you think about building it. So start small and simple, and really focus on why you need to put this in place for your organization. And Josh Burson has a great kind of article that he talks about in terms of putting it in the flow of work. I love the concept of not making it sort of an HR thing or a thing outside of what you do every day. Putting in the flow of how you work, especially for those you were talking about those new managers that are trying to find their footing, to understand those 3 minutes. Do one small thing, just kind of keep it basic, to be honest, because, introduce it to setting those expectations, giving some coaching, right? And then focus on development and recognition to keep that motivation high. You can do those 3 things in the flow of work. So that's, witnessing someone serving a customer well, immediately saying, great, we talked about how I wanted you to do X, Y, Z. That was amazing how you just did that. Let's keep it up. Right there, you just gave performance coaching, right? You just motivated in the flow of work without all this complex form and technology. Now, there's a place for that. And certainly more formally, 'tis the season when we get to year end, we want to capture all of those moments in a formal way to then perhaps inform compensation and bonus and things like that if you have a pay for performance environment. But keeping it in the flow of work, I think is just the key for these small businesses that are strapped for time and resources anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that just kind of dovetails with the informal nature of things and making it feel very organic.
Yeah.
And I think along those lines, I'd be curious to get your guys' take on, obviously, we're seeing all of this stuff around generative AI with ChatGPT and all of these different technological advancements that, it seems like something new is coming out every single day at this point. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen around how technology has been embedded into these processes at your organizations? And then I guess what you're seeing with the small businesses you're working with. And Kia, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah. So when I think about this, I feel like the jury's still out on how we're
Yeah.
incorporating AI. Even for myself, I'm like, what should I be learning about AI in my own role? And so, I'm actually curious more how it's going to, play out in supporting managers, but also helping to support the effectiveness of employees. I think from an HR standpoint, I've typically seen a lot of discussions on AI around recruiting, how we use it that way, and also just with chats and being able to use AI just to help our work become more efficient, helping to answer kind of those simple questions that don't require a ton of heavy lifting. So
Yeah.
I am still grappling with that question. To be honest with you, but we have some with our, with Bennie, we've had some, been able to get training on how to use, AI. And so even though it's encouraged, we're still, receiving information on how we can best use it, best practices, what makes sense as we continue to learn about how it'll grow.
Yeah, for sure. And just to give my own vision a little bit, I think one of the big things that we've seen at Boon is, when we launch our coaching at an organization, we'll see, 40 to 50% of the company sign up, and we're getting insights around what your employees are dealing with. So is it time management and productivity? Is it having these difficult conversations, or is it empathy? What is it? We feel like there is a huge opportunity for Boon and just organizations like Boon in general to really serve as your pulse on the organization. So you as an HR leader should be getting real-time insights and recommendations in terms of, here's what your people are dealing with. Here are the things that you can start incorporating into your company today. And that's stuff that we are doing right now, and we really are serving as that pulse. But I think there is an opportunity to just completely amplify that sort of data that we're collecting and really turn it. I mean, the sort of data and patterns that generative AI is able to recognize around these sorts of things, around, coaching themes and what is being talked about and all of these things, it can serve as your right hand as the HR team. So we see a really big opportunity in that. But Cathy, curious your perspective.
No, I think that's a huge opportunity. And so far with, with TriNet, that's the way in which we've been using and leveraging generative AI mostly, which is, where before we'd have disparate kind of data sets, and you'd have a manual person trying to be figuring out what are the themes, right, and taking so much time and resource to do that. And now within an instant, it's coming back with analysis, algorithms. It's helping us actually even inform our decision making. We're using it through recruitment, through different tools like Eightfold and some of the partners that we work with to help do recommendations and things like that for learning. Almost, I call it the Amazonification of learning, where it recommends based on your learning habits, your development trends, things like that, your needs. We use it all over the place. So I chat like crazy. So while you were talking, I just chatted on free ChatGPT.
You weren't listening. You weren't listening to me.
I was.
You weren't listening. You were just ChatGPT.
Well, this is how quick it is. It took like 1 second, and I said, "How is AI connected in HR?" And I get a list of 67 ways, and it says, in summary, AI in HR is enhancing efficiency, personalization, decision making, while also presenting challenges such as ensuring fairness and dealing with the impact on employment. And it goes on and on. So, so we're using it for our job descriptions. Well, I'm not gone are the days of 20 minutes and an hour to come up with a job description. I'm literally, of course, where we are, like Kia said, is there's some governance. It's still very early. It's first generation, if you will, so to speak. So you need to QA it. You need to make sure that there's some quality assurance. And at the end of the day, as it relates to performance, funny enough, that's the area where AI is tiptoeing. I would not say jumping into the pool. We're more tiptoeing into that space as we're looking at different platforms and things like that, and how to kind of connect that data so that it's more lagging indicator instead of leading. But I'm not a technologist, so I'm going to say what I'm about to say is very biased from an HR executive seat, but technology is to enable, it's not to replace, right? And so I still think as it relates to performance, you got to have those conversations, right? So you've got to have those
100%.
one-on-one conversations, but it can help collect a lot of the other, dots. I mean, it can be even predictive of if someone's going to leave, right? Depending on how many absences they have, how much this, how much that. So there's a lot of analytics that can be very, very powerful all across the spaces of HR.
100%. I think, we're seeing that all of this AI technology, it's all with the caveat of people are starving for human connection more than ever before.
100%.
So I think that's only becoming more exacerbated every day.
Although
Even
I
as the
do
technology.
talk to my Siri, and she tells me that I'm beautiful at least once a day. So
That's
I'm like, okay,
that's a
Siri, give me
good,
some motivation. Give me some
yeah,
Monday
that's a good,
motivation.
yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Start, first thing out of bed.
She's like, you're
Tell me,
powerful. You've got this. I'm like,
tell
love
me how
you.
amazing I am. Honestly, I'm going to start embedding that. That's a good note, Cathy. Um, so I want to go back. I want to go back a little bit to this idea around personal and professional. Obviously, that's an area we play a lot in. But I'm just curious, in the ways that you guys are rolling out and seeing the changes in performance management. You're mentioning the whole human being brought to work, and that really, in my view, being a permanent change. I mean, we're seeing a lot of businesses staying remote, but I feel like the more commonplace now is some sort of hybrid version where it's, call it 50% of the time you're in office. So you're always going to have that remote aspect for a lot of these businesses. And I'm curious, like, what are some of the biggest themes within the personal development and within the professional development that you guys are seeing, and a little bit how those are intertwined together? I know we have a couple of key themes that we're seeing, but I'm curious to see within those big buckets, because they're very broad terms, how are you thinking about the primary pain points that your people are dealing with personally and professionally today? So Cathy, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I would say first and foremost, it's around career pathing, and I would actually call it career latticing. So folks want to, I think there is a bit of anxiety or fear that because I don't have that face time with you, or I'm not in the office with you, that I might be passed over, or that I might not be considered or top of mind. And so that's certainly not the case, right? And you build the structures and governance models in place to ensure you have a fair and equitable promotion process. We just launched one as well. But people want to know that there's still opportunities for them to grow and be connected and stay connected and get put on those cool projects or be able to raise their hand just in a virtual way. And so I think, from a manager perspective, the advice I would give managers is be intentional. You just have to be intentional. You have to keep it top of mind. You have to remember that, oh, I didn't pick, Kia, but she's got some real capabilities over here, right? So I think that's a theme that we're seeing quite a bit. I think the other theme that we're seeing when I speak to the whole self is, and it really does play into the space of wellness. Like, how are you caring for me as an employee, as a person, right? So what are, gone are the days of, I would say, standard benefits, and, Kia would know this, right? But it's more about those supplemental wellness benefits that are really driving that retention of a lot of our employees to understand you care about me, and I need to know that you care about me and my family, and you're feeling, it's felt through the process, right? So I'd say that's another big theme. And then probably lastly, the theme we're seeing is really around, and it could be generational, although I don't know. Sometimes I buy into the generational stuff. Sometimes I don't, depending on what we're talking about. Is just the frequency of opportunities. So we're also seeing where folks want to think differently about their development. So, that's why I intentionally called a lattice. Like, we actually last year launched what we call the TriNet Career Center, which is to really help our TriNet colleagues not have to leave TriNet, but reinvent themselves in many different ways by joining a colleague resource group, let's say, or by leading a project across a different team, or by, helping as we are, getting a greater global footprint, or whatever it might be, connected to their development plan, the feedback they're getting from their peers, as well as their boss about, where and how they should grow, in just a broader way. And so this career center really helps them learn how to interview, learn how to build their resumes. We make assumptions that, folks are knowing how to do this type of stuff. But it's a psychologically safe space for them to come and kind of play a little bit, and get opportunities that way, and sort of expand their capability set.
Yeah. And I think on the career pathing side, we've actually seen, I think there was a study, it was by McKinsey back in 2022. They looked at what were the top reasons for, it was primarily white collar employees leaving their previous employer. And they looked at it cross generationally, and they looked at a number of factors. One of them was compensation, career path, wellness, the whole gamut. And historically, the list has been primarily compensation related.
Sure.
But in 2022, the top reason for employees leaving their previous employer for millennial, Gen Z, and young baby boomers was actually lack of career growth opportunities within their organization. So I think we're really seeing that start to come to the forefront in a big way. But Kia, and I guess maybe just expounding a little bit on, like, I totally agree with you, this idea of wellness and you caring about the whole self. I guess on the personal side, what are some of those bigger themes that you're seeing, Kia? And then if you have anything to add on the career growth side as well.
Yeah, so we definitely try to make sure that employees in clients that we work with have those opportunities to have the professional development, and whether it's through coaching or employees can request, can we go to this conference, can we take this exam or get this certification. Every year, I work on the benefits side as well, and so we're intentional about the type of perks, for example, that we provide. What kind of wellness opportunities do we provide? And so we do often rely on engagement surveys, for example, to see, or benefit surveys to see, like, what is it that employees would like to see more support, or what areas would they like to see more support, and often in the way of funding from their employer. So, for example, this year we have Gym Pass. And so we're able to, a lot of employees are saying, I want to do more, for their physical health. What kind of opportunities do we have there? Going beyond, for example, your medical benefits, and there's usually an EAP, now, employees are able to access Headspace, for example. And then we're looking at what kind of financial wellness opportunities can we provide, whether it's in the way of seminars. So really trying to look at what resources do we provide as the employer to encourage the employee to look at their whole selves as they're, engaging in day-to-day work. How do we let them know that, for example, health is one of our values. So how do we let them know through our offerings that we take that seriously?
I was thinking of this conversation I had about 2 weeks ago with a small business owner, and he says to me, yeah, they just my head person just called out today. No notice, called out today, but what am I going to do? And I said, well, why'd they call out? Well, they had a birthday party to go to for their brother-in-law. I said, and he says, well, I really want to support that. And I'm like, as you should. So I think that like for small businesses, I think flexibility and them figuring out, especially if they have a small workforce, that one person calling out, if they've only got 5 people scheduled, can be huge impact to that business that day. But that's some of the things that we're hearing is like, I want to help support the personal life, well-being, the needs that through this pandemic reflection that are all of a sudden, crossing into this intersection of work and life. But it does have business impact. So they have to be a little bit more agile. Flexibility, I think, is definitely a word that we are seeing and hearing. And that's why many, many workforces don't actually want to go back into an office, because they're really enjoying the flexibility that working at home, throwing in a load of laundry or petting the dog or whatever, that FedEx delivery they can sign for, as opposed to asking neighbors or, having to reschedule it 6 times, whatever it is, just so that they can have a more rich life and a more integrated life. And so for small businesses, I think that's something that I would say is a trend that's not going to stop, that we're going to have to continue to
Yeah.
wrestle with.
Yeah, I think the flexibility is huge. The other thing that we are continuing to see a ton of is just the level of personalization that is needed. And the
Mhm.
example that I give is like, I'm stressed and anxious on a daily basis. A lot of that has to do with how can I be a more effective manager? How can I grow Boon more quickly? How can I think about this tough conversation that I have coming up with a customer or a colleague? And there's such an intertwining between what's going on personally and professionally. A lot of my stress is due to what's going on in the workplace. As Cathy knows, I love my family very much. Um, that's not the area of my life that's necessarily causing me stress, but every employee has their own story.
Yeah.
And I guess where I've kind of run into a challenge and what we continue to hear from HR leaders is like, if I'm a middle manager at an organization and one of my employees comes to me with the story that I just came with, and I'm a manager who does not feel equipped to be talking about the emotional burdens of that employee as part of a broader performance management element of our relationship. What do you do for those managers who are ultimately, what kind of support as a company are you providing for those managers who are ultimately really the ones who are driving the
Yeah.
success of this performance management? So that's the conundrum that I think a lot of small businesses are facing right now is like, how do you equip these managers and senior leaders with the necessary skills to be able to manage the people underneath them? So curious, like, what have been some, low-hanging fruit or good ways to really get those folks the training that they need?
I mean, we have obviously we're a larger organization. We do have the
Yeah.
resources and the infrastructure. So we have a fully baked curriculum for all of our leaders at every level. We have an
Yeah.
inclusive leader program. We have a leadership program that talks about how to be more empathetic and inclusive. We do teach, we have job aids, we do coffee talks, we do learning circles. We do have the infrastructure, and I love my people at TriNet, so thank you for continuing to support all of these efforts, because I do think it does help our managers as they go into these conversations. So for small businesses that might not have all of that support, I would say two things. Read the book One Small Thing and use the one small thing mindset, which is, again, what is the one small thing I can do in this conversation with this employee to make them feel heard? And so that leads me into my second point, which is, listen. I think we don't value that skill enough. A lot of times when there's so much going on, the angst, the anxiety, the world, a lot of these things, our employees just want us to listen and be heard and know that they have a voice and know that they're cared for. And I can tell you there's so much that comes from just using what God gave you, right? The two ears, right? And the one mouth. And really just kind of sitting back in a space that is psychologically safe to let that conversation happen in a supportive way.
Yeah, and I know, Cathy, you have a coaching background, so it sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot of the advice you're giving does kind of stem from some of those, like the coaching lens, which is super valuable, and couldn't agree more. Kia, how about you?
I know for Bennie, just a couple of years ago, we started incorporating manager coaching, especially for new managers. And just when you're talking about kind of the low hanging fruit, just making sure that they're looking at the different ways, that they should be incorporating feedback and, how to handle, various performance issues. And, we're a medium-sized company, a company that's growing, but we do have, an L&D, arm or department. And so that person is able to really look at kind of the landscape of managers, landscape of employees, and kind of see what ongoing support is needed from managers. And I think it's incredibly important because, you always hear people don't leave companies, they leave their managers. So we make sure that we are
100%.
providing support to those managers. If I'm meeting with, a manager that's having, not their own, but, a performance issue with the direct report, I'm asking, hey, are you having if you're terminating someone, or if you are putting, giving someone a warning, or, talking to them about performance, is this the first time they're hearing about it? It shouldn't, I always say issues of performance shouldn't be the first time they hear about something in a conversation, or, during an evaluation period, or when they receive a pet. Are you having those ongoing conversations? And do what kind of support do you need from me or through coaching,
Mhm.
to have those difficult conversations?
Yeah, 100%. I think that has been the inability to have difficult conversations in this remote hybrid environment. That has been
Yeah.
one of the biggest themes that we're hearing about, especially, I mean, this younger generation. We continue to see that there's a non-confrontational element to being that younger manager. And so how do you overcome that? I think you both gave really good examples there. I think we've got a couple questions from the group. So I think before we get to that, I just want to leave one more question for both of you. I know we've covered a lot today. If you were to give one piece of low-hanging fruit advice to a small business that does not have is completely bare bones today, and they're just getting started, they may not even have any HR leader or HR people partners on their team, what would be the first thing that you would want that small business to implement in order to have the greatest impact on their overall performance management today? I know that could be an overwhelming question, but the number one
Coming up
thing.
with just one is the overwhelming part, Alex. I guess I would say the grass is always greener where you water it. So I think about that a lot, which means you have to take time to water it. You have to, and if you want to put in a irrigation system and all of that, great. But if not, you need to just get out there with a hose, that's also good too. So I think just being intentional and put it in the flow of your work. So find a natural place and time and opportunity every week, just continuously, to do one small thing, to give one small piece of feedback, do one small piece of coaching, offer one new opportunity. If you can just start there, you will get the multiplication effect of one a day or one each week, right? And so, the momentum will build from there. So I would just say, keep it simple, start small, but start. Just be intentional about it.
Love that. Compounding is definitely a thing. Kia, how about you?
I totally agree. And I say this as someone that's come from, I'm working with a medium-sized company, and I've previously worked at a very small company of under 100 people. And even, I totally understand the concept of resources, being limited, but I have found that being intentional about providing, especially for managers, which in turn helps employees and direct report, the company as a whole, finding some sort of coaching for managers, that really takes into account intentional, genuine feedback and bias training. I think that I have seen, the most effectiveness and receptiveness from employees and manager once something like that has been incorporated, that says, one, the company cares about it and is willing to invest in it. There's different companies, different types of, training and coaching, at different price points. I've been able to see different levels. So I think I've found, if there was one thing, I would say explore, some form of coaching for managers.
Or partner with
Yeah.
Boon.
Absolutely.
I wasn't shooting for that in the response, but Kia, you kind of teed it up there. Thank you.
No
Yeah, if you
problem.
want to learn more, about Boon, we'll be following up after this. But I couldn't agree more. And I guess some really good questions here. And if you have any other questions, throw them in the Q&A. But this first question we have here, we have a culture where our staff feel that everything soft we do feels performative. And our managers haven't actually had experience receiving quality feedback, so they can't truly envision what it looks or sounds like, despite our sharing examples and sample scripts. How do you suggest we shift our messaging to combat this challenge? Uh, this is a good one, and I think is you know I'm just going to give my high level, but it seems like there is something culturally within the organization where, if everything soft does feel performative, what does that mean in terms of the overall culture at the organization? But Cathy, curious to get your feedback
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. And I don't think that this is perhaps a unique issue.
Oh yeah.
It's sort of the old sort of old frame of HR, right? That, really, is it a business function or is it just right? And so I think that putting it back in the flow of work, going back to the why in terms of your messaging, it sounds like you're already giving scripts and you're already trying to show those examples and role playing and showing what good looks like. But maybe the context is where you need to combat the challenge. So it's not necessarily you sharing here's good, but it's in the context of when and where does that show up. That might help. I think also if you show the impact, so there's something we do in coaching, Alex knows, it's called the contrast. So in some cases, in order for someone to see one side, to contrast it with a different side is the best way for them to see the one side. So in this case, maybe flip it in terms of the contrast view. So if they're not able to see the impact of why a great feedback conversation is important, flip it for them to show them here's how a damaging feedback conversation can impact the culture or what you're doing. Can sometimes help people have that aha moment around, oh yeah, okay, I see it now, I didn't really see it before.
100%. The one other thing I was just thinking about as you were talking, and then Kia, I want to get your take on this. When we've launched Boon at an organization, we're working with about 100 businesses today, and we have seen time and time again, there is a direct correlation between the ultimate success of us rolling out our coaching and how effective it is across an organization and how bought in management is to this initiative and how vulnerable they are themselves. I think something that I always try to do is show vulnerability with myself and kind of embed that into our culture, because ultimately that stuff starts at the top. And if your people don't feel like leadership is bought into this idea of, genuine leadership and receiving authentic feedback, then it's not going to trickle down in the organization. So how can you think about truly getting C-suite and leadership bought in? But Kia, curious your take.
I think when I meet with managers or look at types of performance evaluations or feedback that's given, especially if it's documented, one of the things I go back to, do you have subjective information in there that's not incredibly helpful? Are you being intentional about what the goal is with this employee? They really need specific information. And if you are having a performance conversation or even a performance issue and you don't have specific examples or specific information that you can share, you really need to go back and say, hey, is this a performance issue or is it something else? And so really looking at how the employee is being or how the manager is being intentional and what are they looking to get out of this conversation, similar to what Cathy said, kind of going backwards, and then asking the question, would you find this information helpful for your own performance? If someone told you, X, Y, and Z, and it's performative, is that really helpful? Kind of think about what you as a manager are looking to get out of this and what the employee is probably looking, from you as their manager.
Yeah, and I can't help but connect this to AI. So Microsoft just rolled out in the spring their 360 Copilot, and so anybody that's like a Teams user, we use it. So you can actually record yourself. It's just you, and it will, using AI, tell you how that feedback was before you give feedback. They'll actually tell you how they feel you performed in the meeting with your tone, tenor, were you inclusive? Did you come off, this or that way? And it gives you recommendations for how to say it differently or how to show up differently. So if it's the mechanical side to giving performance, there's tools out there to definitely help you kind of architected or create a rubric, like a smart goals. Feedback can be smart as well, specific, measurable, actionable, relative, and timely. But if it's more the mindset, that's harder to tackle, and that's where I think Alex's point around getting leadership kind of really bought into why it's important.
Yeah. And I think the theme of today is it all comes back to ChatGPT and OpenAI. No. And then one other question, or we had a few other questions. And this is a really good one, Kia. I think it comes back to what you were just talking about with the way that managers are reviewing their folks. We're talking a lot about reviewing empathetically, and what kind of advice do you have for managers or HR leaders to boost performance and effectively review when they themselves are extremely burnt out? So if you're feeling the emotional burden yourself, how do you deal with that?
An example came to mind that I saw at a previous company, not at Bennie, where we had an amazing employee who was a manager, and just would never took vacation, and just felt like they couldn't because things would just fall apart if they left. And I'm like, well, you just hired someone to help take the load off. So what's going on there? Well, I don't think they're ready. I'm like, okay, is this a performance issue, or is this do we need to look at this person's performance and being able to do the work that they've been hired to do, which in turns helps support you as a manager and also their team? Or is there maybe looking at yourself as a manager, what kind of training are you providing? Or are they, does the employee have the opportunity for training? Are they receiving the appropriate training to be able to enable employees to be able to take a day off? Especially when you're talking about a small company, it's very easy for employees to get burnt out. And so when you don't take that time off, it's so hard to do that when you have so much going on. But I'm always like,
Mhm.
the work's not going to get better if you don't address
Yeah.
your burnout. So from a manager perspective, making sure that employees know the resources that are available to all employees to address burnout, but also looking at okay, let's look at the landscape of our team. Do we have every our people resources in place such that work is being distributed in a way that someone's not taking on so much burnout? And how are they
Yeah.
do they feel equipped to be able to share that information?
Yeah, I think that last part you just said is really interesting. Do they feel equipped to actually be able to speak openly about that burnout they're feeling? But Cathy, what's your take?
Yeah, so I would say, and I know we're most at time, so I'll be quick.
Yeah.
Is put on your safety belt first, right? So what do they tell you when you're flying? You're going on a flight before you can put on the belt and the mask of your fellow travelers. So it is important that you get in the right headspace. I've so far at times even said, someone has come to me and said, hey, can I offer you some coaching? And I've actually said no. I've actually said, not at this time. Can we talk on Monday? Because it's 6 o'clock on a Friday. I'm totally burnt out. I know that meeting that we just had didn't go well, but I'm not in the right headspace to have the conversation in a way that will be productive for you and for me, the way that I want to receive the feedback. So you have that right and authority to be able to do that. But I would say, so that's the receiver. As far as the giver, listen, Alex knows I meditate. I do a lot of things to get in the right headspace. Something my therapist taught me years ago was acting as if. And what does that really mean? That means that, sometimes you have to close your eyes and have that image of what would my best self in this moment look like. And then you open your eyes, you go into the meeting and you go, okay, I'm going to show up like that. Even though inside there's a lot going on there that's really, you're struggling with, but in the moment you're acting as if you don't have that going on.
I
And
love
so
that.
sometimes, so there's little tricks you have to, I think, sometimes play with your psyche and your emotion to just help you. And the other thing I would say is you're going to do a disservice to that person, right? So think about how do I want them to feel, like Kia was saying, and how do I want to make sure, because people don't really remember what you say. You probably won't remember much of what we've said today. No, I hope you do. But you will remember how we've made you feel. So I think that, just reminding yourself of that, to say, this might not be the best conversation, but I'm going to go into it with one that is showing that I care. There's empathy there, and I'm going to make them feel like, we're connected. And so I would say I would use those kind of three or four tips that I know have worked for me personally.
Love that. Well, thank you so much, Cathy and Kia. Again, this was
Thank you.
really insightful for me, and I hope everybody got a lot out of this. We will be sharing this recording and following up with everybody, but if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Cathy, or Kia, and take care of yourself, take care of your people, personally and professionally, and you'll be heading in the right direction.
Yeah, give grace.
Grace.
We all need a little more grace and love in the world.
Yes,
Awesome.
thank you for saying that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, take care.
Bye.